Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into some fascinating source material, all about getting women to flirt back. Now, before you think we've turned this into a dating advice show, our goal is to really analyze the communication techniques at play, not tell you what to say on a date. Think of this deep dive as a way to decode the subtle strategies people use to spark attraction and build those initial connections. What makes someone feel intrigued, but also safe enough to let their guard down and flirt back?
It's an interesting question because we often think of flirting as this instinctive thing, but there's actually a lot of psychology and communication strategy happening beneath the surface.
Right, and this source dives into some really surprising tactics. Like, have you ever heard of a semi-sexual compliment? What about playful misinterpretation? Honestly, I'm intrigued and maybe a little intimidated.
Yeah.
But that's what makes this deep dive so interesting.
I think you'll find these techniques fascinating, even if you don't plan to use them yourself. It's all about understanding the dynamics of attraction and how we communicate our intentions, whether consciously or unconsciously.
Okay, so this source really emphasizes the importance of creating a specific energy from the very beginning of an interaction. It's not just about what you say, but the entire vibe you project.
That's a crucial point. Think about it. If you're feeling anxious or insecure, that energy is going to be noticeable even if you're trying to hide it. It's like walking into a room with a rain cloud over your head.
And nobody wants to flirt with a rain cloud.
Exactly. On the other hand, if you're projecting confidence and playfulness, that creates a much more inviting and attractive atmosphere. It signals that you're comfortable in your own skin and open to connection.
So it's about creating that space where someone feels intrigued, but also safe enough to flirt back. You're not going to let your guard down if you feel uncomfortable or pressured.
Absolutely. Think of it like building trust and rapport, even in a brief interaction. And that can influence how someone responds to you, regardless of whether your intentions are friendly, romantic, or even professional.
Okay, so let's get into some of the specific techniques this source recommends. The first one that really caught my eye was this idea of semi-sexual compliments. Instead of going for those generic compliments, they suggest adding a little more spice, but in a playful way.
It's an interesting approach. Think about it. Compliments are powerful because they tap into our desire for validation and appreciation, but they can fall flat if they're too generic or impersonal.
Right, like telling someone you look nice is fine, but it doesn't exactly set the world on fire.
Exactly. But a compliment with a bit of an edge, something that subtly acknowledges the person's attractiveness while also suggesting a deeper level of appreciation that can be much more impactful.
So, for example, instead of saying you look nice, you might say something like, wow, that dress was made for you. It's still complimenting their appearance, but it's more specific and suggestive. It's like you're saying, I see you and I appreciate how amazing you look.
That's a great example. What's interesting here is that it's not just about stating a fact. It's about conveying a feeling. You're highlighting how their appearance specifically impacts you, not just making an objective observation. And that personalization can spark intrigue and make the compliment much more memorable.
The source also gives the example of saying, you have a smile that makes it hard to concentrate. Instead of just, you have a great smile. Okay, maybe it's a little cheesy, but I see the point.
I think it's more about the principle behind the example. It's about adding that element of playful tension, of suggesting that this person has a noticeable effect on you. And that tension, when handled well, can be incredibly attractive.
But the source also cautions against lingering on the compliment. It's about creating that spark and then moving on. Not making someone feel uncomfortable.
Exactly. Confidence is key, but you never want to cross the line into being creepy or pushy. It's about finding that delicate balance between expressing your attraction and respecting their boundaries.
Okay, so we've set the stage with the right energy. We've dropped a compliment with a little something extra. What's next in this flirtation playbook?
Well, according to the source, it's time to break out what they call flirty questions.
Okay, I love a good question. So tell me, what makes a question flirty?
It's all about using questions to deepen the connection and encourage reciprocal flirting. And not just any questions, mind you. They need to be engaging enough to spark a genuine response, but not so personal that they feel intrusive.
So what kind of questions are we talking about?
The source suggests starting with lighter questions, like, what do you find most attractive in a guy? Or what's your favorite thing to do on a Friday night? Things that are fun and flirty, but not too heavy.
Those are good examples. They invite the other person to share something about themselves, but in a playful, low-pressure way. I can see how that would create a more natural back and forth.
What's fascinating here is that these questions are actually doing double duty. On the surface, they're lighthearted and fun, but they're also subtly revealing shared values and interests. It's a quick way to assess compatibility while keeping things engaging.
Okay, so starting to see how these seemingly simple techniques can actually be quite strategic.
Exactly. And as the conversation flows, and you get a sense of the other person's comfort levels, you can start to escalate to slightly more personal questions. Things like, what's the most spontaneous thing you've ever done? Or, what do you think is your best quality? You're gradually increasing the level of intimacy and vulnerability, but always gauging their reactions along the way.
It's like you're slowly turning up the heat without setting off the fire alarm. But what happens if someone challenges your question? Like if they say, why are you asking me that? Yeah, I feel like that could easily derail the whole flirty vibe.
It's a valid concern. And this is where confidence and authenticity become even more important. The source's advice is to own your question, don't backtrack or apologize. Instead, reframe it in a way that demonstrates genuine curiosity and interest.
So for example, if someone asks, why do you want to know what I find attractive? You could say something like, because I'm genuinely curious about what makes you tick. You seem like someone with great taste.
Exactly. You're acknowledging their question, but also subtly reinforcing your attraction. And that confidence, combined with genuine interest, can be incredibly disarming and appealing.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. You're creating a dynamic where you're playful and engaging, but also subtly revealing your intentions. It's almost like a dance, right?
That's a great analogy. It's about reading cues, responding accordingly, and finding a rhythm that works for both of you. And speaking of keeping things playful, this next technique from the source is particularly intriguing. Playful misinterpretation.
Okay, I have to hear this one. What is playful misinterpretation, and how does it work in the context of flirting?
Well, imagine someone says something completely innocent, and you, in a playful way, twist it into something slightly flirtatious.
Give me an example. I need to hear this in action.
Let's say someone says, "That's a terrible shirt you're wearing." Instead of getting defensive, you could respond with something like, "Wow, we just met and you're already trying to get me out of my clothes. You're moving fast."
Okay, I have to admit, that's pretty funny. And I can see how it would lighten the mood and create a flirty banter. It's unexpected and disarming.
Exactly. It's a way to inject humor and innuendo without being too overt. It shows that you're not afraid to have a little fun with the conversation and that you're quick on your feet.
The source also gives the example of someone saying, I spent the weekend by myself. Instead of just saying, oh, cool. You could respond with, that's great. Self-care is so important.
Oh, again, it's a playful misinterpretation that adds a layer of innuendo. But the key here is to keep it light and playful, not creepy or forcible.
I imagine this technique could backfire if it's not done well.
Absolutely. It's a spice, not the main course. You want to sprinkle it in judiciously to keep things interesting. But don't force it or overdo it.
So we've got this foundation of flirty energy. We're using compliments strategically. Asking intriguing questions, and maybe even tossing in some playful misinterpretations. How do we keep the momentum going from here? How do you really build on that initial spark?
That's the art of building a connection. It's like you've planted a seed, and now you need to nurture it. And this source offers some really insightful tips for how to do just that.
Okay, I'm all ears. I feel like this is where things can get tricky. You've got that initial spark, but how do you keep that flame burning bright without accidentally setting the whole house on fire?
You're right, it's a delicate balance, and a lot of people struggle with this stage. This source calls it the art of escalation.
Ooh, the art of escalation. Sounds intriguing and maybe a little dangerous. Tell me more.
It's not about being aggressive or pushy at all. It's about subtly deepening the connection and building anticipation. Think of it like slowly turning up the heat, creating a sense of momentum and excitement.
So it's not going from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds flat. More like a slow burn.
Exactly. And the key is to be attentive and responsive to the other person's cues. You don't want to rush ahead if they're not feeling it.
So if you're sensing that the conversation is flowing well, and they seem open to your advances, how do you subtly take things to the next level?
One approach is to shift from those playful, surface-level compliments to something a bit more personal and intimate.
So instead of complimenting their outfit, you might say something like, I love how confident you are. It's really attractive.
That's a great example. You're acknowledging a quality that goes beyond the superficial. It's about recognizing and appreciating something deeper about them. And that can be incredibly flattering and impactful.
It's like you're saying, I see you and I like what I see on multiple levels.
Exactly. You're showing that you're paying attention, not just to their appearance, but to who they are as a person. And that level of attention and appreciation can be incredibly attractive.
The source also talks about using touch as a way to escalate the interaction. But obviously, this is a very sensitive area.
You're right. Physical touch can be a powerful way to build connection and intimacy. But it's essential to be respectful of boundaries and personal space. You never want to make someone feel uncomfortable or pressured.
So are we talking about like a light touch on the arm while you're making a point, or something more bold? What's appropriate in this context?
It really depends on the context, the dynamic you've established, and the other person's cues. But in general, it's best to start subtly. A brief touch on the arm or shoulder while laughing at a joke, for example, can create a sense of warmth and connection without being overly invasive.
Okay, so it's about testing the waters and seeing how they respond. If they seem receptive, you can gradually increase the frequency or intensity of the touch, but always being mindful of their comfort level.
Exactly. And if they seem hesitant or pull away, you respect their boundaries and back off immediately.
This all sounds good in theory, but I imagine it takes a lot of practice to actually master these escalation techniques. Like, how do you know when to push forward and when to hold back?
It definitely takes practice and a good dose of emotional intelligence. It's about reading those subtle cues, their body language, their tone of voice, their overall energy, and responding accordingly.
It sounds like a dance where you're constantly checking in with your partner to make sure you're both on the same page.
That's a great way to put it. It's about finding a rhythm that works for both of you, being present and responsive to the dynamic of the interaction. And speaking of responding to the dynamic, this source also offers some helpful advice for those moments when things don't go exactly as planned. Because let's face it, not every interaction is going to be fireworks and instant chemistry.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's something a lot of sources gloss over. Like, what happens when the other person isn't reciprocating your advances? What do you do when that carefully crafted compliment falls flat?
It can be a bit of a reality check, for sure. But this source emphasizes the importance of staying calm and collected. Even if you feel a little rejected or deflated, you don't want to take it personally or let it ruin your confidence.
Easier said than done.
Right.
But I get the logic. It's about recognizing that you can't control how someone else responds to you. All you can control is your own behavior and attitude.
Precisely. And sometimes, no matter how charming or witty you are, the other person just isn't interested. And that's okay.
I think that's a really important point. You can't force chemistry or connection, no matter how many clever techniques you have up your sleeve.
Exactly. And the source also emphasizes the importance of respecting boundaries, even when things aren't going your way. If someone seems hesitant or uncomfortable, you don't pressure them or try to convince them to change their mind. You respect their feelings and move on gracefully.
So if someone says, I'm not really looking for anything right now,
Yeah.
you don't try to argue with them or persuade them otherwise.
Exactly. You acknowledge their response and respect their decision. You might say something like, I totally understand. It was great chatting with you, though. And then just leave it at that.
No need to make it awkward or try to salvage the situation. Just accept the response and move on.
Exactly. And you never know, maybe down the road, the timing will be better or circumstances will change. But in that moment, the best thing you can do is be respectful and leave a positive impression.
This all makes sense logically, but emotionally, I think it's a whole other challenge. Rejection is never fun, even if it's handled gracefully.
It's true, but the more you practice these techniques, the more comfortable you'll become with handling those moments when things don't go exactly as planned. And remember, even if a particular interaction doesn't lead to a romantic connection, the skills you develop in the process of flirting can enrich your life in countless ways.
So it's not just about finding a date. It's about becoming a more confident and engaging communicator overall.
Exactly. These are valuable skills that can benefit you in all areas of your life. Personal, professional, social.
This whole conversation has really shifted my perspective on flirting. I used to think of it as this kind of superficial game, but it's really about connecting with another human being on a deeper level.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And ultimately, isn't that what we all crave? To be seen, to be understood, to feel that spark of connection with another person.
Absolutely. And while this source focused on flirting in a romantic context, I think a lot of these techniques can be applied to any type of interaction where you're trying to build rapport and connection.
You're right. Whether you're networking at a conference, trying to make a new friend, or simply chatting with a barista.
Yeah.
These principles of engagement and connection can really enrich your interactions.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. From creating that initial spark to navigating those awkward moments when things don't go as planned. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious to get your overall take on this source material. What are your final thoughts?
Well, I think what's most interesting about this source is that it goes beyond just providing a list of techniques. It really encourages us to think about the underlying principles of attraction and connection.
Right. It's not just about memorizing lines or mimicking behaviors. It's about understanding the psychology at play.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it so valuable, even for people who aren't necessarily looking for romantic advice.
Exactly. It's about becoming a more conscious and skillful communicator, which can benefit you in all areas of your life.
Okay, so we talked about creating that initial spark, escalating the interaction, and even handling those moments when things don't go as planned. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier: authenticity.
Yes. Authenticity is crucial. And I think it's something that often gets lost in conversations about dating and flirting.
It's like people get so caught up in trying to be cool or smooth
Yeah.
that they forget to just be themselves.
It's so true. And I think that's why so many people find flirting to be intimidating or even off-putting. They feel like they have to put on a performance, which can feel inauthentic and even manipulative.
So how do you balance being strategic and intentional in your communication
Yeah.
without losing that sense of genuineness?
I think it's about using these techniques as tools, not as scripts. It's about understanding the principles behind them and then adapting them to your own personality and style.
So instead of trying to be someone you're not,
Yeah.
you're using these insights to enhance and express your authentic self.
Exactly. It's about finding your own unique way to be playful, engaging, and flirtatious in a way that feels true to you.
And I imagine that takes practice, right? Like
Yeah.
becoming more aware of your own communication patterns and experimenting with different approaches.
Absolutely. It's a journey of self-discovery, both in terms of how you communicate and how you connect with others.
This whole deep dive has been such a fascinating exploration of human connection. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about flirting, but about communication and relationships in general.
I'm so glad to hear that. And I think the key takeaway for our listeners is this. While analyzing specific techniques can be helpful, the most important ingredient in any interaction is authenticity. Be yourself, be genuine, and let your personality shine through. That's what will ultimately create a lasting impression.
Beautifully said. And remember, even if a particular interaction doesn't lead to the outcome you hoped for, the skills you develop in the process of flirting can enrich your life in countless ways.
Absolutely. So go out there, be playful, be curious, and enjoy the journey of connecting with others.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of human behavior.